Welcome to Fintech Mix, with me, Nat Barker. This is the podcast for fintech professionals of all stripes, where we learn from some of the most talented people working in the industry. Joining me as my guest for this episode is Dennis Volkmann of Molo Finance. Dennis, it's great to have you with us. Where are you speaking from today?
Hey Nat, based in London, North London. Really happy to be here with you.
But you're not from London originally, am I right in saying?
No, I'm from Rio de Janeiro. Been in London since 2010. Came because of the good weather, stayed because of the good weather, probably.
Sure, yeah, I can imagine it. Yeah. I mean, how long has it been since you've had a chance to go back to Rio?
Well, I used to go on average once a year, which probably is less than what my mom would prefer me to go. But lately, with the pandemic, it's been a while.
Sure. Dennis, you are the CMO of Molo. CMO stands for Chief Marketing Officer, I believe.
Yep, that's right. I've been there for almost a year and a half now. So obviously different journey than planned, but quite exciting results and a lot of learnings in this process.
And what does your role broadly involve?
It's a young startup, so it involves a lot across growth and brand. These would be the two pillars really that you can think of marketing wise, and many choices so that we can scale things. One of the things that are really important to consider when you're thinking of a startup, there's always that flex between the right thing and right now, because you have a vision. If you have experience, you will have an ambition to take things to a certain level, but the gap is usually really big between what you can do right now, what you can achieve right now, and the amount of steps that will take until you get to the right thing. When it comes to marketing, we do many things that we consider strategic in-house. So whether we do paid acquisition, SEO, content generation, paid social, then we have some partners when it comes to PR and some other things that might require some more expertise. We have affiliates, we have partnerships, so all sorts of things that are related to growth and brand.
As a marketing guru, Dennis, there's something I want to ask you. Several, I think maybe 6 companies that we focused on in this podcast so far their names have been 4 or 5 letter words ending in the letter O. What is the deal there? Where does Molo come from? Why do you think that's such a popular formula for a fintech startup?
Well, I think it helps to be short, to be memorable. Molo comes from mortgage love, which is actually something that we try to bring. So Molo comes from a very stereotypical founder story where our founder, Francesca, went through a mortgage herself. Like, if you stop and think about it, getting a home is, for most people, the biggest purchase they'll have across their life. But it's very similar to having a kid. You ask your friends, you do a lot of research, you research some more, then you ask more friends, then you start asking people who have done it. And then when you feel you're ready, you realize that it's more complex than you thought. And she went through what she considers to be a very painful process. And so, okay, we can do something better about it. And really, I think that the mortgage love comes from the concept of, okay, let's do something that's simple, faster, transparent, and bring that experience to people.
Just broadly speaking, you able to tell me a little bit more about Molo and what exactly the company does?
If you were to understand in 3 seconds what Molo does, is we are an online mortgage lender. So that means that you can get a loan online. I was able to get my first house a couple of years ago, and my mortgage unfortunately was not online. So I had to validate documents in the post office, get things signed, get things submitted. You have the broker, you have the conveyancer, you have processes, and you have questions from who's lending money, and then it takes 5 working days, and there's a back and forth. So what we allow is people to have a much faster process with a lot of information up front and during the experience, and really cut a lot of time, save costs, and give online mortgages to people. Right now, we focus on buy-to-let mortgages, but we have residential on the plan. In fact, if the pandemic hadn't happened, probably that would have been launched already in 2020, but it's part of our future.
Okay, just firstly, I guess, a skeptic's instant reaction might be, well, a lot of these administrative hoops that you have to jump through that you described there when you're trying to get a traditional mortgage, as it were, might be described by some people as, checks and balances. And is there a risk when you streamline the process at all? And how do you tackle that? How do you manage that?
I think it's important to assess risk. I think it's important to be compliant. This is a regulated market. There are things that you see in fintech and that you feel very comfortable, not only in fintech, but beyond. Like if you're considering a mortgage and go for an online mortgage, probably you have stayed at an Airbnb, probably you're comfortable taking an Uber, you might have a current account with Monzo or Starling. So there are a number of things that we put into the process. So for example, you will confirm your identity with OnFido. So you will do that through image and video and voice, and you'll do that within a minute or less, rather than having to do it like me, who took my passport or my driving license, I don't even remember, maybe both, to the post office, got somebody to sign it, paid for that, submitted to my conveyancer, who then sent it to my brokers, and probably they send it to my lender. We have integrations with Experian, where you can have your proof of income done within a minute or less. We have integrations with Rightmove to understand characteristics of the property versus other properties. So we're leveraging data just to have smart, intelligent solutions. We do have people and experts in the background double checking things when required, but it all has to do, as you mentioned, with risk. So everything is very calculated. So we believe that not only are we delivering faster things, but there's even the opportunity of having less human errors when it comes to data that's just streamlined and connected to really reliable partners.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. How many mortgages, how many accounts have you got through Molo at the moment?
Well, we have had thousands of applications, which is really exciting for us. So just to give you an example, the mortgage goes through 4 phases. We have the decision in principle, which is basically you input information about yourself, about the loan, and about the property. You will get a message from us saying, okay, we're likely to be able to lend you money. And 90% of those dips, as we call it, happen under a minute. So really fast, soft credit check, doesn't affect your credit score. Then there's a mortgage application, which sometimes is done within hours, sometimes a little bit longer. It depends on the person, but that's where you input all the information about your application. Then you receive a mortgage offer, and then obviously it depends on the availability of the property, on the timing of the people, and also things with your conveyancer. We are very excited that we did a pause last year when COVID-19 came, and we needed to understand what was happening and even being able to physically execute a few things. We relaunched in August, and between August and December, we had £1 billion, just over £1 billion in decisions in principle on our website. And if we look at our entire history, we had 1.8 decisions in principle. So what we noticed with the pandemic is that there was an online shift in terms of demand. So people who were interested were already present. People who were interested but unsure suddenly were confident enough. And I think that people who were skeptical or with doubts or with some resistance saw that there really weren't any other options available because of the physical distancing and other impositions put by the government and the pandemic itself. What has been really interesting for us to see, Nat, was a difference in behavior of online consumption. So our traffic and our conversions on our website, which is where things happen, used to be dictated by work days and by workday hours. So you would see less traffic in the beginning of the day, less traffic at night, and a peak just around lunchtime and sustaining across the afternoon. And suddenly that shifted considerably. So now we see traffic distributed across all the days, where Saturday and Sunday aren't the worst days of the week. If you think of volume and value, you see a difference in hours where things are more distributed. So more activity in the morning, a lot more activity in the evening and until midnight. And you actually see a decrease between 12 and 2 and 7 and 8, where people are probably around a table having their meal at home.
Interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting stuff. Yeah. And I guess that's the kind of insights into the people that are, thinking about taking out a mortgage with you guys that you might not get if you were, a kind of a not purely online mortgage provider.
It's a benefit for people because not only do we have the technology that makes things faster, but we're available any day, anytime. So people can do that when they feel like it and when the time is right for them.
Yeah, sure. One thing I did want to ask you, mortgage lending can be quite it's clearly a high stakes game, sort of inherently, and it requires a lot of financial heft to take that on. And At the same time, during the pandemic, some people have struggled, and many of those have been people who live in the private rented sector, and therefore, by extension, buy-to-let landlords have found themselves losing money. How do you kind of tackle those kind of problems? That balance of the high stakes, the high amounts of money that are involved in mortgage provision, and the potentially high risks when you think about something like the coronavirus pandemic and the impact that's had on people's property portfolios. Basically, how do you manage that as a relatively new player compared to some of the massive building societies and banks out there?
That's a tough question. I think that people have different views on the government and the pandemic and regulations. My personal opinion is that things like the mortgage holidays, things like even the furlough program, I think that the UK is in a stronger position than many other nations based on where we are and what we have and what we can do. What we have seen with Molo is that our customers haven't really needed to go resort to a mortgage holiday. I think that the investment that they did was quite safe. And what we see in reality is many people seeing a buy-to-let mortgage as a safer investment within so much uncertainty than other possibilities. So people who do have the money are probably more likely to invest in a buy-to-let mortgage or add that to their portfolio versus maybe investing in different types of things.
Sure. Okay. I imagine that you guys have got quite sizable levels of funding behind you at the moment. Is that fair to say?
That's important. So like any other startup, we have equity investment, right? Which would be, seed investment, Series A, and then we're progressing towards a Series B. Then we have debt investment, which is really the right partner. So it's a bit like a dating game and really finding the right partners, just like you do with equity, but with debt, so that you define, okay, this is the amount of money that we have to loan via Molo under these criteria.
Okay, and so it's just buy-to-let mortgages at the moment. Why is that? And did you mention that there are potential ambitions to move into the wider mortgage market?
Yeah, Molo wasn't created for buy-to-let. Molo was created for mortgages and to help people get a house, whether it's a home or whether it's a property for investment purposes. Buy-to-let is an excellent place to begin as a startup because there's less regulation and more possibilities to test the product, scale it well, and we have done that. So the things that we did back in 2018, 2019, 2020 were very important for us to be able to leverage through buy-to-let, which enabled us to do this. And now we're ready. We already would have been ready to move on to residential, which is more regulated, and that will be an important next step for us.
Okay, yeah, certainly. Yeah, I think that's interesting because you can see how the sort of user experience that you're describing could be something really valuable to, first-time buyers, kind of stripping out some of the stress associated with trying to buy your first home. And do you think that that's where Molo sees itself sort of doing its best work, as it were?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's really interesting to see, the reactions of our customers. So first-time buyers, some of them are extremely well prepared. Others just need the information, and we're happy to provide that. But often people are surprised. Oh, my application's already done. It's complete. I don't need to send anything. Are you sure? Is everything okay? It's like, yeah, everything's okay. Like you check out, your documents are fine. You're perfect. It's done. And then I think there's also a lot of value perceived by people who have been through the process. So sometimes there might even be a little bit of resistance, like, okay, I've already done mortgages a few times or many times. There are people whose career is through property investment, and they feel very comfortable with the relationships, with the methodology, something that's worked well for them so far. And they're like, why would I do it differently? And then often in these cases, they're pleasantly surprised by how fast and how quick and how simple things were, simply because we're using technology to provide a better experience.
Okay, sure. Something I wanted to ask you is that, I think the housing market can be treacherous ground reputationally. It is a market, but the commodity is ultimately people's homes, and so there's an obvious risk that comes with that. And for instance, a high profile example at the moment is the EWS crisis, which listeners may not be familiar with, but basically it's a part of the fallout from the Grenfell Tower fire tragedy in 2017, where a lot of mortgage lenders are now requesting forms to clear the cladding systems on blocks of flats before they provide mortgages. And it's a tremendously complex issue, which I won't go into any further now, but it's something that has led some mortgage lenders to be kind of criticised by government for the approach they're taking. And from a marketing point of view, as a kind of a new player moving into the space, do you think about these things and sort of how you sort of manage Molo's reputation when you're moving, wading out into waters that can be quite choppy sometimes.
For sure. I think that part of our values as transparency and fair exchanges come with that. I think it starts from very clear communication. The one of the worst things that can happen is you not even being able to have a conversation or to provide clarity to people about eligibility and criteria and things which you're suggesting fall under that. I think there are a number of other things. For example, I think we're better set up to be able to provide loans for people who are self-employed. Right. So like the way that mortgages work today is very similar to the way mortgages used to work 2 decades ago, 4 decades ago. So the process that our parents went through and our grandparents went through was obviously they didn't have smartphones and laptops, but it was quite similar in principle. And I think that the world has changed. So there are safety issues and there are other things which are complicated and complex and need to be discussed. But there are other things that might not even seem like issues, but that become very serious issues if you are self-employed or if you just happen to have a lifestyle which is very normal for 2021, but that isn't part of a traditional way of being and building your credit score. And that exclusion is something that's also very sensitive.
The UK government has been quite clear that, it's quite keen to sort of foster the ambition of fintechs in the UK and make the UK a bit of a global sort of centre for fintech. I mean, do you see with that as context, do you see fintech sort of becoming the norm for the way we do some of these, big, financial events in our life? For instance, the way we access mortgages. Do you think that the Molo model could become basically the dominant one?
I think it definitely should be an option for people, and that's what we try and do. We do mortgages in a different way because we believe that is a better experience for people. We believe that we're bringing value. It is a different path, and we're inviting people to join us. A cool thing about Molo is that you can get a mortgage directly without a broker, or if you prefer, you can find one of our partners. So we partner with Dynamo, with LNG, and you can use a broker if you feel better that way and get a mortgage through Molo, which is also a fast and simple experience. So I think that there are things that we don't question anymore if we should be using technology or not. So I worked for many years at Airbnb, and nowadays, whether you rent an Airbnb or not, you don't think twice before booking a trip. You're buying your flights, you're thinking of your accommodation, you're thinking of what you want to do, you do your research, you do your bookings, you do everything online. It's normal, it's part of life. So it's not because it's fintech that it needs to be one way or another. It's because it's where we are, right? And it's where we're going and how technology helps us have better experiences. I think that more important than whether we're using technology or not is whether we're being ethical, whether we're providing value, whether we're generating the right customer experience, and whether we're creating the right relationships. And I think that that's what's going to differentiate the fintechs that make it or don't in the long term.
Do you have a sense of, given your experience working in the industry, what it is that makes a successful fintech idea, and what it is that, means that something doesn't quite fly?
I think it's all about the people, right? Obviously, when you think about fintech, you think about technology, and it's obvious that there is technology behind it, but you need to find people with your values. You need to find people with the right mindset, with the right ambition. And if you find that, that means that you can build something special that you can scale with the right people in the right way for the right people as well.
We talked quite a lot about Molo and its operations, but I'd like to ask you a little bit more about yourself, if that's okay. Can you tell me about your career? You've kind of touched on it briefly there, but how did you come to be, CMO at Molo?
I think I work with marketing because I'm curious about people. I like to solve problems, but ultimately I'm very curious. I studied business administration, which was a good foundation, I would say, but I was, I wanted to be more creative, and I studied advertising, creative advertising, and then I missed the business part, and then I began working with planning, which was kind of a bridge in between both. Working client side, agency side, consultancy, became a manager, still back in Brazil, and then moved to London, where I had to restart and adjust to a different market and different perspective. Like I'm Brazilian, so my big stereotype is that I love football. So it's almost like I used to play the National League back in Brazil. I had, some talent and experience, but I came here and I needed to adjust. Okay, I'm going to play the Champions League. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And I think here is very international, which is very exciting. So eventually what worked for me was startups. I think that I love working with startups because there's so much potential. Like if you choose the right startups, there's a cause that you believe in and you're working with a purpose. And there's that mindset to scale, to transform things. And that's something that excites me a lot. Part of my career was with performance marketing. Part of my career was with brand marketing. So I have always been a bit more of a generalist. And then as I developed my career, I realized that I also had to improve a bit more with my operations, with my management, and another set of skills that allowed me to develop into becoming a CMO. So as I became a more senior marketing professional, that's when I really started to fail a lot. Because if you work with startups, you feel very comfortable failing because it's part of the process, right? You're trying to innovate, you're trying to do things, and most of them won't work, but that's how you keep testing and keep pushing and until you find something that will transform things in a really positive way. And I think that the same thing happens with your career, right? If you have the ambition to go far, and if that's important for you, you will try things outside of your comfort zone and you will fail as well. So it's part of the process.
So okay, so I guess your advice, to somebody, a bright-eyed young fintech or marketing professional interested in getting involved in a career in the industry would be: don't be afraid to fail. It's part of the process.
Don't be afraid to fail, and I think that's the easiest part. I think being resilient and trying again is the hardest part, right? I think that you need to understand what's important to you. So now to give you an example, like the moment that was pivotal in my career and really where I think that I took control of my career was when I moved to Airbnb. I was working at Shell. Shell is a huge brand. My dad was proud. That's the best memory that I have. I have other really nice memories of working there, but I remember how proud my dad was about me working at Shell, a big brand, a company that he knew for all his life. And I moved to Airbnb to make less money. But I knew that I believed in what they offered. I knew how I wanted to develop my career. I knew what that would bring to me, even if I wasn't successful, like in the definition that maybe is success for other people. I understood who I was and how I wanted to develop and how that would help me in my journey. There isn't a definition for success. There are so many. There's an exercise that I even like to do with my team called career anchors, where there are things about lifestyle, safety and security, problem solving, freedom, whether you're a generalist, whether you're an expert. There are so many different ways of being happy and being successful, right? So once you understand yourself and make choices that help you be happy, do something that you do well, and find that exchange with the right companies and being part of the right teams, that's when you're set up to fail and learn and keep trying. But it's all about the alignment with the right people and the right company, and then having the resilience to learn from your mistakes, to learn that sometimes even if you believe that you're not completely wrong, that maybe you were in the wrong place, and just keep pushing.
Just finally, is there anyone working in the fintech world who you particularly admire?
Oh, wow. I wasn't prepared for that as probably I should, but I'm going to give a friend of mine a shout, Danny Martinez.
Okay. Dennis, thanks ever so much for joining us. Just before I let you go and get on with your non-podcast life, I would love to ask you some quickfire questions, if I may. Is
Sure.
that okay?
Yeah.
So I'm going to start by saying, what do you prefer, Netflix binge or Night on the Town?
Netflix.
Are you watching anything good at the moment?
I was loving to watch the Formula One series so much that I have finished it, but I really recommend it. I think it's such a smart form of marketing. They are creating exciting content and they are re-engaging people with Formula One and getting fans.
Are you a cook? And if so, do you have a signature dish?
I am a cook. This is one of the things that I love to do together with my wife. We have been cooking a lot of risotto with prawns, with fish, and a lot of Italian dishes lately. I think that the new lifestyle that has happened across the last year has really helped us refine our skills.
What's your ideal way to spend a day off?
Well, if I have a little bit more than a day off, I would love to travel. I would say that's the thing that I miss the most. I think that my days have blended into very similar days. I love to work and I love not to have to think about, okay, now I'm working, now I'm not. So working from home allows me to do that for good and for bad. But yeah, I really miss traveling, even if it's a day trip.
Do you have a favorite superhero?
Well, my superhero wasn't really a superhero. My hero as a childhood was Ayrton Senna. So maybe that's why I'm into the Formula One series. I grew up watching him and he represented a lot for our country. His leadership, his spirit, his tenacity, his ambition was very inspiring.
What is an everyday thing that you couldn't live without?
Oh, wow. You know what my favorite thing right now is? I have a pen and paper and I love to scribble things. It's silly, but it makes me so happy. Maybe because everything else is digital.
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, that's an interesting one. I quite like that. If you were in the Olympics, what would be your Olympic event? It could be real or otherwise.
It has to be football. I mean, probably if I tried to compete for something, I would try to focus on something that I'm slightly better. But I really love football. I would probably not get a medal, but I would have fun.
Okay. And finally, if you were on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here, what would be your nightmare challenge?
Oh, wow. You know what? Now, I hate heights, but I always challenge myself. So I've been in those, glass decks. I've been in one in Chamonix up in the mountains. I've been, I think, at the Sears Tower in Chicago. And I keep going to these very tall places. Even the Shard, I found a corner where I was just staring down and completely terrified with my sweaty palms and everything. So probably anything with heights would bother me a lot, but I would be up for the challenge.
So you're somebody who's terrified of heights, but sort of actively seeks out frightening encounters with heights.
I don't know. It just bothers me. It bothers me. And I think that it bothers me so much that I keep challenging myself, hoping that it won't bother me, but still haven't
No luck just yet.
gotten over that. Yeah. No.
Dennis, thanks so much for joining me for this episode of Fintech Mix. It's been a pleasure.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hope you enjoyed this episode of Fintech Mix. If so, you are strongly encouraged to look out for our next episode, which is the last in the series. If you haven't already, why not take a look through our modest back catalogue at some of our previous episodes with more great guests from across Fintechville. Fintech Mix is a podcast from Say Hello to Audio. To find out more, visit fintechmix.com.